Go.
Okay, so what I wanted to talk today about is how you can foster a data-driven culture within your organization. What we work with on clients, a number of key projects. One is they're looking to enable self-service throughout the organization, and more recently, they're looking to how they can leverage generative AI using enterprise data to be able to provide those services to whether it's internal stakeholders or partners, customers outside the organization. So that's really going to be the focus, talking about how leveraging a logical data fabric or a logical data management platform, you can drive this within your organization. So part of the challenges that people are facing are really around how do you access the data? How do you drive that? How do you drive that easier access to the data to allow individuals to achieve what they're looking to achieve? In a recent survey, while most organizations identified that they realized to be successful, they need to involve business users with inside of that whole initiative for data self-service, very few of them, or less than 25%, says that they're actually involving or business users are getting involved in that process. And it went on to say that 57% of them were not even sure really how to get started. So that's going to be part of the focus. But that issue doesn't only revolve around data self-service. In a recent survey done by Drexel University, only 12% of the respondents said that their data is of sufficient quality and accessibility for them to achieve what they're looking to do around their AI initiatives. So there's a gap between what people are looking to achieve and what they believe they're able to achieve with their current infrastructure. And why is that? In many organizations, there's an over-reliance on IT. The accessing of the data is too complex for a lot of the end users. It's limited in what they can access. The ability to explore, discover new data sets, then access them for what they're looking to do just isn't sufficient. There's also the underlying cause of a lot of that is data's fragmented. You have information stored within your data lake houses, but it's also then in your ERP systems or any number of other systems. So there's a number of different implications for that. Time to value when you have new projects, getting access to the new data becomes an issue, and it's stifling innovation, creativity, and really having that data-driven culture. Another thing when people start thinking about, okay, what do we do around data self-service, is a lot of it's thought of as how do we give access to the information inside of the dashboards? How do we give access to, the data scientists are going to build out a new model? But I think that to be successful these days, you have to think of it more broadly. Here's a slide from a Gartner presentation that they presented at a recent event that I was at. And what they're talking about is not only do you have to think about self-service for those people that are looking to self-enable or self-access the analytics via a reporting tool, but now what you have is you have people that are looking to create new data sets, take perhaps data products that are being offered to them, customize them for the needs, combine them with perhaps other data sets. So you have basically the people looking to explore and also innovators, which are going to actually do more of the transformation, converting the data products that you make available to them. So if you think of that more broadly, you're going to be able to satisfy more of the needs, be more agile in what's being delivered to the organization. So when we talk to organizations, we guide them in a number of different areas. You have to think about this in that original context that most people think of as data self-service around the analytics and the AI. But it's also more recently been coming around, how do you empower these domain teams that are looking to create data products? What tools, what services do you have to make available to them to make it easy where they can take over ownership of the creation of data products and be able to make sure that what they're doing still falls within the proper governance that's in place, that it's complying with the regulatory requirements and policies of the organization and all that. The third set of stakeholders that are important to consider in this process is also application developers. Whether this is just looking to leverage and build smarter applications for traditional web-based applications or mobile applications, or more recently, the focus around generative AI, those users have different requirements, a different need on how you're going to be delivering the data to them, and you need to count all of that into when you're looking to build out what your strategy is around that. So the first thing you need to consider is building a strong data foundation. How do you make this information available? And as I mentioned earlier, a logical approach to data management where you're understanding and accepting and embracing that data is distributed, but now how do we make that data available to those different stakeholders as though they're connecting to one well-integrated data source, and they shouldn't necessarily have to worry about the complexity of the underlying data system. So if you think from the data product creation, there's a number of different stakeholders inside of the process that's creating it, whether it's the data product owner, the data engineers, the platform engineers, the data consumers. I'm not going to really drain the different aspects and the different stages inside of the data product lifecycle, but there's two main points that I wanted to highlight here. With any data that you're making available, and this I think was highlighted if you were in the session earlier, where one of the things they were saying is this whole concept of creating a data product and you're completed with it is a fallacy. That a data product is constantly evolving. The needs of the organization's changing. Feedback from the data consumers reporting potential issues or additional enhancements that are needed. It's a continually evolving set of information that you have to make available. So you have to figure out how is that going to work? How are you going to make it a collaborative process where you're collecting the feedback and iterating and supporting the business as the needs grow? The other part is around what I was just talking around is collaborative. Make sure the tools that you're putting in place is going to support that scenario for you. So if you do that, it's going to be a good start in what we're talking around from all of the standpoints, regardless if it's around the analytics, creating the data products, or supporting the needs of the application developers. So a logical data management framework is going to support your data product through its entire life cycle, supporting both your data self-service, data democratization efforts, as well as what you're looking to do around generative AI and bridging the gaps between the information knowledge you have within the organization, as well as with the LLMs so they can leverage that information. So what's needed to be able to provide that capability to the users? The semantic unification of all data. And what I'm meaning by that is not only are you bringing together the information, but you're presenting it to the user in a form that's going to be actionable by them. The archaic naming conventions that are within inside of the different applications they're using, the schema naming isn't necessarily intuitive to the people that you're looking to connect with. Also, the language that somebody might be using in sales and marketing might be different than perhaps the same information being presented to somebody in finance. Being able to present it to the different users in a format that's going to be acceptable to them is a key part. You need to also be able to support a wide range of systems because as the use cases grow, especially around generative AI, the sources in which information is going to be needed to be pulled from is really important. The other thing you need to consider if you're supporting all those different stakeholders I talked about is how are you going to deliver that information to them? So SQL's the obvious choice that most people think of, especially around dashboards and reporting applications. But if you're talking about application developers, they're going to be more interested in REST APIs, GraphQL, OData. They're going to be perhaps leveraging event-driven architectures around Kafka, JMS. So you need to think through how are you going to deliver that data so the end users can consume it how they want to. If you're going to tell everyone that you have to do it in a certain way, you're going to run into issues and run into problems being able to get that wide adoption you really need to do. Later on, I'll talk about one use case or one customer that was able to get over 90% adoption of their targeted audience. And it's around a lot of that focus to deliver it and how the users want to consume it. So it's an important part. The last part to consider is the large language modules, the generative AI initiative you have their own requirements around how they're going to gain access to the data, how that data is made available to the large language modules and things like RAG. So that's a consideration as well. The other situation, okay, sorry, was it build out? So Forrester did a study looking at this logical approach to delivering data. And they found that by taking this approach, users were able to deliver new data sets 65% quicker, or basically a third of the time. Also, it significantly reduced the data preparation times required by data scientists. So there's real significant value in doing this approach over traditional ETL type models, ELT type models. Also, what it does is deliver it in a more real time, because what you're doing is you're going to be able to access that information directly from the source, and you don't have the batch processes that are going to basically add an inherent latency because it's only running every so often. The next part that's important on the data infrastructure is how are you going to do this federated governance as you allow more domain teams to take over ownership of the data? What's the right way to empower them, to give them the autonomy that they want, but also to centrally control that the corporate policies, regulatory requirements, and all that are being enforced. So by allowing information to be categorized or tagged so they can identify that this column contains personally identifiable information, or it contains social security numbers, or whatever the type of information is, they can categorize that then allows a centralized security team to define the rules at a global level. So anyone who's sharing personally identifiable information is going to be restricted to this particular way of displaying the information, masking the information, making sure that that information is not shared outside the organization, not shared with anybody in a particular role. And that's a key aspect. And like I said, what it allows is the autonomy of the domain teams to own what they're doing, but they don't necessarily have to be bogged down with all of the different rules, regulations, policies, and that on how information should be shared or how it should not be shared. The other critical piece is being able to show value. A lot of the pushback at this point is a lot of investment's been going into generative AI, but they're not showing the value. They're not showing what business value is coming from that. So there's a few aspects that you should consider in this. Do you have a way to see how the data is being consumed, what resources are going to be consumed on the systems that are storing the information, what resources are being consumed from the platforms, the BI tools and the other tools, and see the total cost of delivering on that particular use case to make sure you're driving value. Those same dashboards are also very helpful in showing what value your team's delivering. You can say, look, we have this number of people using the platform, or we have, in this particular use case, it's only costing us this, and we've been able to launch a new product around this, or we've been able to bring on new business partnership, and whatever the use case is, you can prove out the value. The other thing that's important is, as you now have this federation of ownership, the knowledge, the skill set of the audience isn't necessarily the same as when you had a core data engineering team putting together the different queries that are being run and things like that. So leveraging automated tools to make sure that the queries are executing most efficiently, that you're not wasting resources, that if you perhaps co-located information near one another, that you could reduce costs. Having the automated recommendations is a key part to ensure that you're getting the proper value without unnecessarily spending the money. The next part, and as I talked about a bit earlier, the key is really how do you empower people to explore and find the information they're looking for. So the concept around a data marketplace is very important. A data marketplace, in my mind, is a little bit different than what a lot of people might think of as a data catalog. A data catalog, typically, the core audience that's going to leverage that is the data stewards, the data engineers, data teams, but it's not necessarily architected and designed for that end user, the business analyst. It's a little bit more technical than that. A data marketplace should provide an experience very similar to what you might get if you go into an e-commerce site. Connect, and it's going to recommend based on past queries that you did, these data sets might be interesting to you. Show you trending data sets that others are using, and it might say, oh, I should take a look at that as well. Presenting to them things of interest, just like the e-commerce sites present things to you, and then you end up saying, oh, that is interesting, and you're going to buy it. Well, you'll have the data consumers consuming that. By making those data sets more available to them, they're not only narrowly focused on what they might be looking for to do there, but it might foster them to start looking in a different direction, to see new insights, to innovate, to drive different decisions. The other thing is it helps build confidence in the information they're getting if they're able to go in there and see the detailed product description, the data product description, and everything that's associated with that data set that allows them to have the confidence this is going to be beneficial to them. Seeing the full lineage of where that information is coming from or where it's being consumed, and they know I can go to this particular dashboard to access that information. They don't have to create it again from scratch for their particular use, but drive further reuse. Another key part around the marketplace is what goes back to what I was talking around that data product lifecycle. How do you foster collaboration between the different users? You have a data consumer who uses the product, they can endorse it so other people have confidence in it. Going back to the same thing as like if shopping on Amazon, you see more of those stars, you are going to have more faith in it. But also being able to provide feedback, ask questions of the data owner, report data quality issues. All of this is a full feedback loop that allows the data product owners to understand how they can improve what they're doing, what they're delivering to the business. Allow them to track the different requests, so when they are making changes, they're going to incorporate all the different changes that are needed within the platform. Being the data product owner, if you know that you're going to deprecate this data product because you're coming out with a new one that provides everything that it has in there, but also some additional capabilities, you can do that as well to notify the people that are using that product. So all of these things are important. The other thing, and we're talking about simplifying access for the average end user. A key part now is how can you leverage generative AI to simplify the tasks for these data consumers? What can you do to automate and augment the tasks that perhaps your data engineers may have done in the past that might be able to be automated or significantly simplified for the people that are now taking on ownership to create their own data products. There's a wide variety of different options out there being offered by the different vendors. Here's just a few examples where within the platform it'll make recommendations around how to do different joins or simplify any kind of transformations that might be needed. Really empowering those users. Remember on that slide earlier from Gartner that you said you had the people that are exploring and then the innovators, allowing them to customize the data for their particular use case, that last mile transformation type of work that they would need to support their specific use case. Remember, the key value you're going to get from data products is reuse. So if you make it for a general use case, you make it really easy for the end users to customize it for their specific use case, you're going to drive up the reuse, you're going to drive up the business value you're going to get from that platform. So there's a tremendous amount of work being done by many vendors that are saying, hey, look, you have the ability to look at patterns of how people are doing the transformations, how they're building out the different steps that they're doing, and automate some of those steps. Also, what we see is, and it was talked about this morning in some of the keynotes, a desire to have a conversation with the data, not necessarily having to build out a SQL query, but rather just ask a question and get an answer. Users aren't necessarily even looking to get into a dashboard and click through. They just want to say, what's the #1 selling product in the Pacific Northwest, blah, 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 and get the answer. So all of that is very possible now with generative AI being built into these different marketplaces and making it much easier to be able to basically allow people to have conversations with the data and not necessarily have to do it via a dashboard. The next part I wanted to talk about is shifting specifically to around generative AI. I imagine most people in the room, maybe show of hands, how many people are familiar with RAG or retrieval augmented generation and how people are working with the LLMs? Many people know? Okay. I'll explain it a little bit more. But let me set up the stage a little bit on where there's a gap currently in how people are building out generative AI applications. One of the big areas that's missing is access to real-time information. And I'll explain in a minute why that gap exists. But you have needs, if you're going to drive compelling customer experiences, and that could be your internal stakeholders, your internal customers, that could be business partners, or that could be actual customers of your organization. But what people want is answers to questions in real time. They're not looking for a gap of maybe a few hours or a day and stuff like that. Where's my shipment? What's my current balance? What's the current inventory level? Do you have enough on hand that I place my order? I'm going to get it filled quickly. These are all sets of information that's dynamically changing constantly. And the initial approach people have taken to building out generative AI doesn't necessarily support this use case very well. So there wasn't a big show of hands, so I'll just quickly explain around the way that most people are leveraging corporate information with generative AI is using something they call retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And what that is if you think about using your ChatGPT, you go in and type the question, it's been trained on a wide set of information, so it uses that to provide the response to you. If you're asking, what's the #1 selling product again in the Pacific Northwest, it's never been trained on that. That's information specific to your organization. So there's a pre-step where they're going to go out and look for that information or where they can find that information. They'll pull that information back, and that's provided as part of the prompt for then the LLM to provide the appropriate answer back. So there's two approaches that can be done with that. The first is you put everything into a vector database. So you do the proper embeddings, you add the information into the vector database, and now when the question's asked, what happens is the system can go to the vector database, pull back the appropriate information, and then the response goes back. This is a perfect use case if you think of something around perhaps a customer support application. You can load the product documentation, you can load the knowledge base into the system, and this works fine. It's good because it'll work with structured and unstructured data. The problem is there's a few limitations around it. First of all, the security is somewhat limited. So you're not necessarily going to have fine-grained access controls of who can access what information. It basically is not getting access to live information because it's complex to constantly update that vector database. It can be done, but it takes time. There's usually latency in being able to move the information in there and all of that. So the second approach, if you're talking about looking to get access to real-time information, is what they call text to SQL. And there's a difference here. Rather than adding all of the information into the vector database, think of you have this database table. You can load the schema into the vector database, and then there's a pre-step. An LLM will look at what's the schema for that database, build a SQL statement, and then against the database, it'll run, pull back the appropriate information, and then provide that along with the prompt to be able to respond to the answer. Okay? The problem with that, what's nice about it, first let me talk about the pros. The pros around that is you can leverage the security that's part of the database. So you already had fine-grained access controls and all of that. It works great with structured data. The drawback of it is it assumed all of the information is in a single database, and we know reality is we have information in lots of different tables. We have information in different data systems. So what's the best source of the data to go after? What is the SQL dialect used for that system? Because the SQL dialects between different applications vary. How do I ensure that I'm accessing the most up-to-date information? How do I ensure that I'm going after the best source to get that? Because you probably have, your CRM system is the best place to get information about a customer, but if it's talking about an order, your ERP system is probably a better system. So it introduces a lot of complexity, and we've worked with a number of customers that they weren't able to get past this complexity in dealing with a lot of these challenges until what they did is they added that logical abstraction layer, that logical approach to data management. So what happens is the SQL that's being executed is common because it's all being executed against that universal semantic layer. And what happens is the information that's available in that semantic layer is what's put into the vector database. So not only do you have the technical metadata, the schema of the different tables and that from the system, but you have the business metadata, the semantics that are probably more closely aligned with the prompt that came in. They're using the same vocabulary that an end user would use with those semantics. And there's additional information. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what this does is it provides a single location to access all data regardless of where it is within an organization. It allows fine-grained access controls because in that logical data access layer, you can define the granular rights of who can get access to it, how you process the information, if the information should be masked because of the particular person that's using it, or because it's personally identifiable information or healthcare information, or whatever the case might be. So there's a lot of value from that. Additionally, the information that's available in that dramatically improves the accuracy of what's coming back from the LLM. It basically or virtually eliminates hallucinations from the AI system. It dramatically improves it. And there's a number of different factors that drive that up. So the chart on here is showing using a standard benchmark data set, and there's actually a few of them, but they actually have standard benchmarks of here's these data sets where you can test out how accurate your generative AI responses are. And leveraging that additional metadata that's available by taking this logical approach, It enhances the context. It provides that technical metadata, the business metadata. It provides information about associations between different tables that allows the SQL that's generated to be a lot more accurate, even if it's pulling across different tables. It also provides the relationships between tables. What it does is also allows or provides denormalized access to the information, all of this. But all of these different factors, the additional information that's available because the unique position that the logical data management has sitting between the data consumers and the data sources, it has a lot more information, including how and what data sets are the most popular, which ones have been refreshed more frequently. All of that information dramatically improves the accuracy of the responses coming back from your generative AI applications. So what I wanted to do is shift a bit to the value you get from implementing a logical data access layer atop of your different data sources. So the first, and I touched upon the first few earlier, but there's a significant improvement in time to value, whether that's cutting down the time it takes to onboard new data sources or dramatically reducing the amount of data preparation time that are needed by data scientists for them to access well-curated data for the models they're building, or if it's being able to quickly share information with LLMs as they're trying to respond to the prompts. But also, I mentioned earlier about the intelligent query optimization. There's been tests and studies run where leveraging that intelligent optimization, if you're executing queries in a distributed environment, this approach could be 10 times faster than if you're just going and using traditional models, going out and doing the federated queries. So what I wanted to do is talk about a few examples here around data democratization and generative AI customers. So the first one is Landsbanken. And what they had is a goal to empower everyone within the organization to access the information they needed. I touched upon them briefly earlier when I was talking about delivering the data to the customer or the stakeholder in the way they want to. What they were able to do by leveraging a logical approach to delivering the information is delivering or getting over 90% of the target users within the organization to leverage this single source or single access point. The key, and one of the things they did, I mentioned around supporting not only SQL, but REST and all of these other things, but they went on, they leveraged the API interface to create spreadsheets. They said their finance department, the people that are on the finance side of the house, and being a bank, that's a large audience in their user base, they would create and connect a spreadsheet to an API that gave them access to a particular data set, data product, and users just went and they accessed the spreadsheet. That's how those people wanted to consume it. They didn't want to go to Power BI or Tableau. They didn't want to go into a marketplace. So they looked at each of the different stakeholders they had, met them, and provided that information to them the way they wanted to access it. But the benefit to the organization from that is they were pulling all of the information from a single source of truth, that golden record that significantly improved the consistency of what was being reported on, but also drove up the adoption. So they got significant value out of that because over 90% of the people now were leveraging enterprise data to drive decisions, improve the decision making that was taking place. The next example I wanted to talk about is Alec Forbes, which is the largest pension fund or investment funds for pensions in South Africa. What they were looking to do is build out a generative AI powered agent to support some operational use cases. They weren't the first people within the organization to leverage generative AI, but they were the first ones looking to do this for operational information. And what happened is they were getting pushback from the governance team because they wanted to make copies of the information and move it into the vector database. So the governance team's like, hold on, each time you make a copy, it complicates things for us. Customer wants their information removed from the system. Where is all the different information? For governance folks, just making another copy of something or storing another version of something, they really don't like that. So they were getting pushback there. However, also, that same team spent a long time to have that single source of truth, that golden record of information, and they were going to be violating what they built over the course of a year or two if they took that approach of the traditional moving everything into the vector database. So when they tried to do the text to SQL, they ran into a lot of the problems I talked about. By leveraging that logical approach, they were able to access the information in real time from the source system, be able to build this out very quickly, and be able to provide that real-time operational examples. And they made this available to their different customers. So customers are able to come in and start asking questions about the investments they made, what other options they have, what the current balance is, all of these different things significantly improve the customer experience. The last one I want to talk about is Festo, which is a large industrial manufacturer. They actually make equipment that other manufacturers use. So they make equipment to automate the manufacturing of other products. So they're sort of the people that help power that automation type of thing. They have tens of thousands of different products provided to a variety of different industries and all of that. They did a lot of work around generative AI. They had something on their internal portal, which was a generative AI skills zone. And they did things around, text to speech, speech to text, a whole lot of different services. But what they weren't able to provide is that whole ability to have a conversation with the enterprise data, allowing their stakeholders to basically use a chat GDP type of experience. And it's because they were running into a number of challenges around both security and being able to access that information. Leveraging the AI SDK from Denodo, which basically boils down about, maybe about 20 different patterns that an AI app developer would need to do to build out a generative AI agent into a handful of simple REST calls. So they could simply pass the plain text English question or prompt that came in to their chatbot via a REST call and get a response back, leveraging that whole flow that I talked about of looking up the information in the metadata, building the SQL, executing it, pulling back the information, getting that response. All of that was hidden from the developers. So now any developer familiar with REST, they were able to start empowering to leverage corporate information to build out these AI agents. And it was very helpful for them. They've now had a number of different applications they're able to launch for both internal users and external users within the organization, and really drive a whole new user experience for customers. So that's what I had to present. What I'd like to do is open it up to any questions, if anyone has any questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two questions. One is, I work for a large company that has bought lots of other small companies, so we have all these disparate systems. It's very much like what you described.
Yep.
How do you get buy-in from all of the various pieces of an organization that use different platforms on what to use on what to use to bring everything together? Because we have like maybe 3 or 4 data platforms of record. Sure. And everyone's building new ones all the time for the things that they care about in their own little.
Sure. So one of the common use cases is exactly what you described. mergers and acquisitions, all of a sudden now you have a whole new landscape, a whole new estate that you have to deal with. The fact that what you're doing is we're not changing anything from the back-end data sources. So you acquire a company and let's just say they have 40 different systems that contain information. By adding this layer atop, they still control that information. That information is not being moved into the corporate environment that you just got acquired. They still control that data. They can control who accesses it, but what it does is it provides centralized access to those sources as opposed to moving everything into a particular repository and everything. So not only in the case of mergers and acquisitions, but quite often within the large organizations, and the larger, the more common this is, there's territorial possession of or interest in keeping ownership of, like, this is our information, we don't want to give it to anyone else. And this approach is very strong in being able to do that because they still maintain the ownership of the control of, and it's just being accessed. In many cases, it can just be a read, so the information is being read, but there's no duplicate copies or the information, so it's quite strong in that particular use case, but even just that whole, people being political and trying to maintain control over their information.
Yeah, let me rephrase. I'm not saying how do you get everyone to put their data in one place. That's not what we're looking for. It's how do you get everyone to agree on a single solution for an overarching semantic layer.
Yep.
As opposed to this group has their own idea about how to share data. This group has their own idea. How do you get everybody on the same page?
Typically, and where I said we work with many companies doing the whole mergers and acquisitions, that the parent organization that is doing the acquisition, they set the standard of saying this is how we're going to do it. So that doesn't necessarily mean, let's just say that company already had a logical approach. They can access that as a single data source, or they can go directly to the data systems themselves. But it's usually that somebody has to decide, okay, this is the standard that we're going to use. And over time, I think, as the data lakehouses actually become more interoperable in the different open table formats, some of that will help be resolved and stuff, but still they're not fully interoperable. But it's somebody's going to have to say, okay, this is the standard. There's no magic there.
The other question I had is, what you described sounds a lot like data mesh. Is this essentially a flavor of data mesh?
I didn't get into it, but yeah, part of that lab banking project was they were building out a data fabric and a data mesh to be able to drive some of that. But yes, it's very much that same exact scenario. Some companies, and you listen to Gartner, are like, well, a data mesh, and they're very strict on how you define it. But the key concepts around the whole data product is, the autonomy of the teams that are creating it, the centralized governance, a platform that supports it, creating the data product. So yes, very much it's the concept around a data mesh, but whether you're fully following that or only in spirit following it, it doesn't matter. It's giving you the tools in place that will allow you to federate ownership but have centralized control.
Any other questions? Those are two great ones, so I encountered them a couple times myself. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. That's
Thank you very
perfect.
much.
We've got a 4:15. I think